Today on Inside Utah Politics, record-breaking turnout. We are digging into huge numbers for the 2020 election and the canvassing and certification process with the State Director of Elections. And the first round of COVID vaccine distribution could be just weeks away. The very latest on how HHS plans to get it out and when they believe it will be ready for use.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Glenn Mills. It is time to go inside Utah politics. We begin today with State Director of Elections, Justin Lee. He's here to look back at what turned out to be an historic election cycle. Justin, thanks for being on the show today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Wow, that's all I can say. I mean, I said record-breaking, but probably even record-shattering numbers. Break them all down for us because it was incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's almost not enough hyperbole or expressions to describe how good the turnout is here in Utah. So we hit 90.09% of active voter turnout. Now, if you compare that to previous elections, in 2016, we had 82% of active voter turnout, and that was our highest ever. We were really excited about that. Well, I shouldn't say ever, highest in about 60 years. But 90% goes back to 1964 was the last time we were in that territory when we had 89% turnout. So just mind-blowing turnout across the board.
Yeah, and I like how you bring that up because this isn't just about the population getting bigger. This is just percentage of active voters.
That's right. We're not just talking about more people voting, although 1.5 million people voting, that's 360,000 more people than voted in 2016. So raw numbers is very impressive. But the other number I want to talk about is the vote eligible population. So this is the group of people that could register and could vote. And we had a huge number of those people who showed out. Our previous high was 59% of the vote eligible population. And we only have numbers going back to about 2000 for that. But this year we're up to 69% of the vote eligible population turning out. So again, just mind-blowing numbers.
Yeah, no doubt about that. All right, let's dig into that a little bit. Your thoughts on why so many people came out? Was it candidate related? Was it mail-in ballots? What was it?
Yeah, I think it's the combo. There's two things that really drive turnout. One is as an interesting issue or a candidate on the ballot. If we look back at 2018, we had medical marijuana on the ballot, proposition number 2, and that was the contest with the most votes in the state, and we had the highest midterm turnout we've ever had, beating most presidential elections in 2018. So certainly the presidential race this year drove a lot of turnout. But the other part comes from ease of voting. We have mail-in voting here in Utah, and we've done it for a while. There's ways that people can vote in person or put those in the drop box, and that certainly helped our turnout as well.
We're going to dig into that a little bit more, but an interesting note from the election, we had one candidate, at least one that I'm aware of, reach over 1 million votes.
That's right. Auditor John Dougal got over 1 million votes, which is the first time I think we've ever seen a candidate who's broken 1 million votes here in Utah. And that's really almost as many votes as we had total in 2016. So it's a big threshold.
Now that's an interesting way to look at that. One candidate got just about as many as what we saw in 2016.
That's right.
All right, let's dig into the canvassing process a little bit more. It kind of was thrown into the spotlight this year, more so than others. First off, give us the definition of what that is and what's going on during that time.
So the canvass is really the official certification period and official certification process for the ballot. So after Election Day, there's still, as everyone knows here in Utah, plenty of ballots to be counted with by-mail ballots and then provisional ballots. And then what happens 2 weeks after the election at the county level is the Board of Canvassers meets. And really at the county level, that's just the county commission or the county council. And they look at all the election returns and then certify that official turnout, the official numbers of the races, and that's called the canvass. And then a few days later, the state does the same thing where for any multi-county or statewide races, the state auditor, state treasurer, and attorney general get together and become the state board of canvassers and then certify the official returns.
And I believe that was done on Monday of this past week, correct?
That's right, this last Monday.
Okay. All right, so we really, here in Utah, we're kind of used to that, but this time it seemed like maybe it was more widespread where we saw from election night to the final canvassing period, 2 weeks later, some really close races flipped. It seems like we saw more of those this year than we have in past elections.
You know, it did seem like it. We saw quite a few races flip, and it's not too different here in Utah. This is something we've seen for a long time, particularly with vote by mail. But when you have a very, very close race, it's not unusual to see a change. But what was interesting is that we saw several, particularly House races, that were leaning one way on election night, and even for several days after election night, and by the time we got to the official canvass, had flipped to the other candidates. So I'm not sure exactly what that says about the voters who turned out at one point versus the other, or the voters who voted through the provisional process, maybe registered to vote on election day. But that was an interesting shift.
Yeah, I think it was kind of a surprise that even provisionals broke so big for Republican candidates. So we were following closely another one, Utah's 4th Congressional District, and I think this came from probably more so people outside of the state of Utah, but even here in the state of Utah, the big question is, what's taking so long? You already kind of went through that, but that's just how it is when we have mail-in ballots, right?
It is. This is part of the deal. But I'll say for the 4th Congressional District, even before we were voting by mail, so back when the district was first created, and the first election we had the 4th Congressional District was 2012. And back then, we didn't have as many mail-in ballots. Duchesne County was the only county voting by mail. And we also had a blackout period where you didn't get election results after election night until that canvass period. And so people who remember that it was, just a little over 700 votes that separated the outcome in 2012 in the 4th District, and we didn't know that outcome for 2 weeks even back then. But we have seen with vote by mail, we have a lot more ballots that come in after election day and have to be counted. So I think we're used to it here. In 2018, the 4th Congressional District was one of the last congressional seats in the whole country to be called. And in some ways, I'm grateful that there's other things to talk about this year, so everyone wasn't completely focused on the 4th Congressional.
Yeah, it seems like at the beginning of my career, election night was election night, and now election night goes for 2 weeks after, and that's just kind of what we've gotten used to. The President of the United States did not embrace mail-in ballots. He, talked about the potential for fraud. I want to talk to you about that. Here in the state of Utah, I know you can only speak of that, but in general, how safe are mail-in ballots when it comes to fraud and other irregularities?
Mail-in balloting is very safe. Here in Utah, and I will say, mail-in balloting is very safe in most places in the country. There are a lot of checks and balances that we have in place to make sure that the ballots are counted as they should be, and the people who are saying they're voting their mail-in ballot are the ones voting. We have unique barcodes for every voter when they vote that ballot. So when it comes back, we check that into the system. We have several examples of voter signatures so that we can make sure that it is that person who is signing. And one of the benefits of doing this for several years is our county clerks are even better at verifying signatures than they've ever been. So it's safe and it's secure, and it's also audited. After Election Day and before the canvass, when it's certified, there's an audit done on the count, and there's also an audit done on signature verification to make sure that that's working well. So it works well, it's safe and it's secure, and it turns it turns people out at a higher rate, which is a benefit all around.
Okay, any issues with this election? I know we had John right before and we talked about a couple, but now that it's done, certified, and you're looking back at it, did everything run smoothly to your liking?
This really was the smoothest election that I've ever seen here when it comes to by mail and just probably voting all around. Our county clerks were on just high alert this year, just with everything going on with questions about vote by mail, with the pandemic. Our county clerks really dug in and did a very admirable job of running this election. We had a couple little hang-ups. We know there was the issue in Sanpete County with the envelopes.
Address that. Was that all worked out
It was.
appropriately?
Originally, they sent out the envelopes and it didn't have the affidavit on there. They used the cure letter process to reach out to voters, make sure that they signed. And when it came to turnout, Sanpete County had the same turnout as most other counties. They were there, I think, in our top 10 counties. So a little hang up there, but they worked through it and it worked out just fine.
You brought up 2018, and we also remember Utah County in 2018. Things did not go well there. A new county clerk there now, Amelia Powers Gardner. It seems like she got a grip of that and turned it around pretty quickly.
Absolutely. We can't talk about how well Utah County did enough. They were famously called the epicenter of dysfunction in 2018, and they're certainly not that anymore. They had great turnout. They didn't have any real issues to talk about the whole year. So kudos to Utah County for the work they did, and Amelia and her team really deserve some recognition. All
right, Justin, great to have you on the show. Usually we have you on before the election. This time is no usual year, so we decided to have you back on and take a look back. Appreciate your time.
Hey, thank you.
You bet. Still to come, Governor Gary Herbert extends the statewide mask mandate but loosens restrictions on social gatherings. Our panel weighs in on that move a little later. But first, food banks across the country are feeling the added demand of the holiday season during a pandemic, and officials warn it may only get worse. We'll get to that right after the break. The Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services says they are preparing to quickly deliver vaccines to states as early as December 11th. That's just 24 hours after the FDA is scheduled to discuss emergency use authorization for Pfizer's vaccine. Washington correspondent Anna Warnicki reports on how they plan to distribute and when you could get it.
Hope and help are on the way.
Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar says enough COVID-19 vaccines for 20 million people will be distributed by the end of this year.
If all goes well, we could be distributing vaccine soon after December 10th.
Azar said on Tuesday that once the FDA approves Pfizer's emergency use request, the department is ready to ship 6.4 million doses within 24 hours.
Then, we hope administration can begin as soon as the product arrives.
Azar says they've been conducting test shipments to ensure everything goes smoothly.
Local hospitals, doctors' offices, local pharmacies such as CVS and Walgreens.
Four-star General Gus Perna says the vaccines will be distributed in priority waves. The initial push will focus on the most vulnerable Americans, followed by senior citizens and healthcare workers in January.
If there's more available after the initial push, then it will go out in the following weekly cadences of distribution accordingly.
Azar says that means the general public likely won't be able to get their hands on a vaccine until next spring. So Americans should still be cautious.
Especially now, as we approach Thanksgiving. Take care of yourselves. Be careful, because there is such a bright day ahead.
The health department says they're working with jurisdictions to make sure they're prepared to properly store and administer the vaccine as soon as they receive it. In Washington, I'm Anna Warnicki.
Food insecurity continues to rise across the country, but just how long can food banks keep up with this demand? Washington correspondent Rashad Hudson has more.
As Thanksgiving nears, food banks nationwide are struggling to keep up with the skyrocketing demand.
Those are millions more families that are now struggling.
This week in Texas, cars were stretched for miles trying to get food.
5.3 miles, it was 750 cars today.
Food banks are doing everything they can to keep up.
Before the pandemic, there was 35 million people that were facing hunger in America. We project that now it may be up to 50 million people.
To meet the need, state agriculture departments are teaming up with area food pantries. Alabama's agriculture commissioner says his state is using funds from the CARES Act to purchase food in large quantities.
And we delivered a tractor-trailer load of table eggs to food banks, and which was some 25,000 dozen.
For people who are having to turn to food banks for help, many of them are doing so for the first time. Feeding America Food Bank is calling on Congress to pass a new stimulus bill to extend funding for organizations like theirs.
We are running out of some food support that has passed through the CARES Act.
They're also encouraging people who can to donate to their local food bank. In Washington, I'm Rashad Hudson.
Still ahead, the GSA signs off on the transition process for President-elect Joe Biden. Why the delay? Our panel debates that after the break.
You're watching Inside Utah Politics.
Time now to debate some of the big stories of the week with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have State Senators Luz Escamilla and Todd Weiler. Great to have both of you on the show. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Glenn.
Let's start off with coronavirus mandates. During the week, we saw the governor stick with and extend the statewide mask mandate, but then loosening mandates on social gatherings. Senator Escamilla, Salt Lake City mayor, came out against that. What say you?
I support the mayor on this one. I think we should have kept those guidelines. We've seen, which is great news, some decrease in the numbers. Those mask mandates are helpful. Having people be reminded that they're not supposed to be gathering, more than 10 people is the best way of doing it. It's safe. Right now we need it in Utah. We still have really high numbers. Our positive rate is really high. I hope we can go back and continue those pieces in place. Those guidelines are helpful.
Senator Weiler, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's pretty wise not to criminalize people getting together for Thanksgiving. I mean, that would have been a joke a year ago. So I think the governor has given a lot of cautions. He keeps on saying, hold your Thanksgiving outside if possible. I don't know who's going to do that in Salt Lake, maybe in St. George, but I do think it's important that we're not arresting grandma on Thanksgiving.
So that is the big debate here, Senator Escamilla, is personal liberty versus public health. How do you bring those two together with your position on this?
Yeah, I mean, this is a public health crisis. Our numbers are extremely high compared to even our neighboring states. I mean, we're, I think, number 4 in the country. So until we don't manage to flatten our curve, we need to take action. And I'm not seeing that criminalization taking place. I think by having it, people being reminded that that's the law, I think people tend to follow the law. So I mean, there's a reason why we do those type of pieces when there's a public health crisis, and I don't see grandmothers being criminalized. I just think we need to be conscious and continue doing what is right. But by changing guidelines, it's just sending the wrong message. We need to be continue with the message that we're in the middle of a crisis and Utah has really high positive rates.
Senator Weiler, on Wednesday we did see cases go down quite a bit, but deaths really shot up, 26 on Wednesday, and medical professionals are warning if you get together on Thanksgiving, that number is going to continue to go up. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think we're entering the 10th month of this public health crisis. I think we all know a lot more now than we did, last February or March. And I expect that Utahns will be responsible. I think that they'll wear masks where appropriate, that they'll social distance. I hope people will leave doors and windows open to increase circulation, pull out a fan, and do what they can. But there's a lot of people, including elderly people, that have said, look, this is my life, and I'd rather live my life for what time I have rather than stay coped up in the basement. And I think that there is an element of personal responsibility. And the 26 deaths are tragic, Glenn, but fortunately our death rate in Utah continues to be very, very low, and I hope that will continue.
Where does this go from here? We're hearing now that a vaccine round 1 could be just weeks away. Once we start to see that vaccine distributed and available to people, Senator Escamilla, what's the future? Where do we go from here?
I think we need to keep thinking that we're talking about months before we get a hold of this situation. Having the vaccine, it will be available for the most vulnerable populations, our first responders, our those essential workers. It's going to take a while to get it to the entire state. So we need to continue being very vigilant on those guidelines. I know, the death rate for Utah is low, that's true, but our positive rate is so high. I mean, you're risking a lot. It's a risk, and some of us have lost loved ones through COVID. We know that it's just not a joke. I mean, this is for reals. And 10 people, gathering of 10 people, I know it's small for many families in Utah. We have large families, but in a small space as a home. I mean, not everyone has very, very large homes. If you have that, of course, you can probably do more social distancing. It's not, it's just one Thanksgiving. We want them to be together for many more Thanksgivings and many more holidays, so that will be my recommendation.
Senator Weiler, where do you see this going? Vaccine, like I said, first round of distribution, maybe weeks away, but as Senator Escamilla points out, by the time the general population gets it, still months away. Where does this go from here?
Well, I think as soon as the vaccine becomes available, the fight's going to be about who should get it and why, and you're going to see a lot of criticism there. Also, you're going to see people refusing to get it, and I think where we're headed 6 months from now is if you don't have a UPC symbol on your phone showing that you've had the vaccine twice, Delta Airlines may not let you on their flights, and Home Depot may not let you in their stores. I think that's where we're headed. I think 2021 is still going to be very divisive. And I'm still getting emails. People are afraid the government's going to mandate the vaccine. I think everyone should take the vaccine, but I think it has to be voluntary.
Okay, we could continue to go on this conversation for a long time, but let's move on to something else. The presidential transition started taking place during the week. The General Services Administration signing off on allowing those resources to go to President-elect Biden. Senator Escamilla, let's start with you on this one as well. Why the delay?
Well, you know, we need to recognize that the GSA administrator, I think it's Ms. Murphy, it's an appointment of President Trump, and he clearly has been very loud about his opposition to accepting the results. So the 16-day delay, you know, clearly I think is in response to the fact that she works for the president and at the pleasure of the president. I'm glad that this has changed, that now that there's been more certification of elections, you know, of different states, now they've issued that letter saying, you know, we're ready. It's unfortunate that it took this long, but it's not the first time. My understanding is that there's also another situation in 2000 when, you know, people were not accepting the results, but I'm glad we're moving forward, excited for that.
Glenn, there was this 16-day delay is a fantasy. Emily Murphy did her job. The media does not declare the president the president. The actual election will take place on December 14th when the Electoral College meets. But Emily Murphy went all the way back to 1963, and her hands were tied because, I mean, she opened this up the same day that Nevada finally finished counting their votes. And so we didn't have a president-elect on election night. Mm-hmm. The media, the federal law doesn't say you start the transition team once ABC declares a winner. And the fact of the matter is there are still canvassing and certifications.
But Senator, we also don't leave that to one candidate who doesn't want to accept the fact of how things are looking as well.
But Emily Murphy should not be criticized for following the law. There was no precedent and no federal statutes that said that she could start the transition before a president conceded or before the election had been certified. And so she did her job. She should be complimented, not criticized.
Do you think the president was the one pulling the strings there, though?
Well, the president, had he conceded the race earlier, then the precedent said that she would start the transition. But without him conceding, she had no authority to start the transition funding and arrangements. And so I'm glad that Trump finally did. I think he waited too long. But if you want to criticize someone, don't criticize Emily Murphy.
What about, you both bring up the point, it's not the first time this has happened. That's definitely a fair point there. But the Biden, or President-elect Biden and his administration wanting to move forward, saying that that delay was costly. Your thoughts, Senator Escamilla?
I think every transition needs its time, and you know, I think it's going to cost. Again, she works at the pleasure of the president, so she was pleasing the president, and whether, you know, was her activity illegal, out of the guidelines, I agree actually with the senator that that's not the case. There's it's not very clear, the language, so maybe this is a good opportunity to bring more clarity to that role of that position during this process. But I think she's just was working at the pleasure of the president. The president was upset and you know, in a way having a tantrum. So this is kind of like the aftermath.
I don't think there's a harm here, Glenn. Joe Biden has been in the swamp for 47 years. Every single person he's appointing to his cabinet is part of the swamp. These people have been in D.C. most of their adult lives. I think the transition will be fine.
Okay, we have about a minute left. I want to hit one other thing real quick, and that is the Dow hitting 30,000 during the week. Historic moment there. The president, we heard him warn in the campaign that if Biden were elected, the market would crash. What do we make of that, seeing how the market has responded since? Senator Weiler, let's start with you.
The Dow's responding to the coronavirus vaccines. I don't think they're responding to the presidential election, but I'm glad. I mean, I've got my retirement account in the market, so I'm glad to see it go up. It went up historic amounts under Trump, and I hope it goes up. And you know, Joe Biden's a known quantity. I think if Bernie Sanders had been elected or Elizabeth Warren, we'd be seeing a different market reaction.
All right, Senator Escamilla,
just
you have
happy
the final
to
30
see.
seconds.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it has to do with Biden being elected. The world has reacted great to his election, so it's good. It's good for the economy. Different factors affect, of course, how the Dow responds, but I'm glad that the presidential election this time is bringing really good news, and worldwide we're getting good response for that election.
All right, great conversation. Appreciate having the insight of both of you. Thanks for being with us this morning.
Thanks, Glenn.
Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break. leave you now with a look at what's on the radar in the world of politics. The new governor and other elected state officials will soon take the oath of office. Utah Inauguration Day is January 4th. The general legislative session begins that same month. Opening day is Tuesday, January 19th, and the presidential inauguration is the following day, Wednesday, the 20th. Make sure to connect with me on social media. I'd like to know what you think of this show and other issues important to you. You can email me at InsideUtahPolitics@abc4.com. You can also follow me on Twitter and Facebook. Just log on and search Glenn Mills, ABC4. Thanks so much for making us part of your day. We hope to see you again next week as we go inside Utah politics.